So this one came from someone who messaged me at like 3 in the morning, saying they still can't sleep with their closet door open. By the end of this, you'll understand why. Alright, welcome back. If you're new here, this is where people send in the stuff that actually happened to them. No scripts, no actors, just real accounts from real people. Today we've got 3 stories, all connected by one thing, the night shift. That stretch of hours between midnight and sunrise when most of the world's asleep, and apparently, a lot of them wish they were too. Quick heads up before we start: if you've got your own story, there's a link in the description. I read every single submission myself. Alright, let's get into it. Story 1, the gas station. I used to work the overnight shift at a gas station just off the interstate. Not the busy kind with a convenience store attached, the small kind, 2 pumps, 1 register, open all night because truckers needed somewhere to stop between cities. I was 19, needed the money for community college, and figured sitting behind a counter reading textbooks for 8 hours a night was about as easy as a job could get. The place had been there since before I was born, according to the faded sign out front. One of those old school stations that had somehow survived while every other business on that stretch of road had shut down or been replaced by something newer. It smelled like stale coffee and motor oil, and the fluorescent lights buzzed just loud enough that you noticed it in the quiet hours. I didn't mind any of that. I actually liked the quiet. It gave me time to study, and the pay was better than anything else I could find that fit around my school schedule. For the first few months, it was exactly what I expected. Boring. A trucker would stop every hour or so, grab coffee, maybe a pack of cigarettes, and be gone in 5 minutes. I'd get through half a chapter of biology between customers. Sometimes an entire hour would pass without the bell over the door making a sound, just me, the hum of the refrigerators, and whatever late-night radio station still played out there. My manager, a guy named Gary who'd worked there for over a decade, warned me about one thing before he left me alone with the night shift for the first time. If someone knocks on the back door, he said, don't answer it. I asked him why. The back door led to a small storage room, no customer access, and definitely no reason for anyone to be back there at 2 a.m. He just shook his head and said, just don't. Call me if it happens and I'll explain in the morning. Then he left, and I figured he was messing with the new kid. Every job has that one guy who likes scaring people on their first week. 3 weeks passed. Nothing happened. I asked a couple of the daytime employees about it once, casually, trying not to sound too curious. Most of them just laughed it off, said Gary liked messing with new hires, that it was basically a tradition at this point. One girl, though, a cashier who worked the evening shift right before mine, got quiet for a second and just said, just don't answer it if it happens, before changing the subject entirely. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured she was just going along with the joke. By week 4, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing entirely. The job had settled into a routine, and my biggest concern most nights was whether I'd get through enough of my textbook before my eyes gave out. Then, one night in October, it happened. It was around 2:40 a.m. I remember the time because I just looked at the clock, wondering how much longer until my shift ended, doing that thing where you calculate exactly how many hours and minutes are left down to the second. The store was dead silent, no customers for almost an hour, just the hum of the refrigerators and a radio playing low behind the counter, some late-night talk show host rambling about something I wasn't really listening to. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back door. My stomach dropped instantly. I hadn't thought about Gary's warning in weeks, but it came rushing back the second I heard those knocks. I sat frozen behind the counter, staring at that door, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same slow pace, like whoever was on the other side wasn't in any hurry at all. Like they had all the time in the world and knew I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at a door that led to a room with no other exit, no windows, nothing back there but boxes of inventory and a bare light bulb hanging from a cord. I ran through every logical explanation I could think of. A branch hitting the building. Pipes settling. An animal. None of it matched what I'd heard. Branches don't knock in sets of 3 with even spacing. Pipes don't wait for silence and then start again like they're testing your patience. I thought about the cashier who told me not to answer it, and for the first time since she'd said it, her words felt less like a joke and more like a warning I hadn't taken seriously enough. The knocking stopped for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, except this time it wasn't 3 knocks. It was slower. Just 1 knock every 10 seconds or so, almost rhythmic, almost patient, like something testing whether I was going to respond. I grabbed my phone and called Gary. He picked up on the second ring, which honestly scared me more than the knocking, like he'd been waiting for the call. "It's happening," was all I said. He told me to stay where I was, keep the front door locked, and not go anywhere near the back room until he arrived. He lived 15 minutes away. Those 15 minutes were the longest of my life. The knocking continued on and off the entire time, sometimes stopping for a few minutes, then starting again, always from the same spot on the door. When Gary finally showed up, he didn't look surprised. He looked tired, like a man dealing with something he'd dealt with many times before. He walked straight to the back door, and I noticed he didn't touch the handle. He just stood in front of it and said, loud enough for whatever was on the other side to hear, "It's Gary. She's not opening this door. Go home." The knocking stopped immediately. Not gradually, instantly, like someone flipping a switch. I asked him what was going on, and he sat me down and told me the store had been built on the site of an old motel back in the 70s. Something had happened there, he wouldn't say exactly what, just that it involved someone who worked the night shift decades ago and never made it home. He said the knocking had started a few years after the gas station opened, and it only ever happened to whoever was working alone overnight. He said as long as you never opened that door, it never came further than the storage room. I asked why he hadn't warned me more clearly before my first shift. He said, "Would you have believed me if I told you the full story on your first day?" I worked there for another year after that night. The knocking happened maybe 5 or 6 more times, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always from that same door. I never opened it. I quit the job when I transferred to a university out of state, and I still don't know what would have happened if I had. Story 2, the hospital corridor. I worked as a security guard at a hospital for almost 3 years, mostly on the overnight rotation. Most of the job was uneventful, checking badges, walking the halls, responding to the occasional confused patient who'd wandered somewhere they shouldn't be, buzzing in the odd family member who showed up at 4 a.m. because a relative was in the ICU. It's a strange kind of job. Hospitals never fully sleep, but overnight, they get this hollowed out quality, like a building wearing a costume of the busy place it is during the day. There was one wing of the hospital, though, that every guard on the night shift avoided if they could help it, the Old East Wing, a section that had been mostly decommissioned and was only used for storage and a handful of overflow rooms during busy periods. It had been part of the original hospital structure, built decades before the newer wings were added, and you could tell just by walking in the tile was a different color, the ceilings were lower, and half the fixtures looked like they hadn't been updated since the building went up. I'd heard rumors about that wing before I ever had to walk it myself. Guards talked about hearing footsteps on the security cameras when no one was there, about motion sensors triggering in empty rooms with nobody visible on the feed, about a cold spot near room 214 that never seemed to warm up no matter what the thermostat said or how many times maintenance checked the vents. One older guard told me he'd stopped taking that section of his rounds seriously years ago and just did a quick visual check from the connector doors instead of walking the full length. I didn't put much stock in any of it. Hospitals are old buildings creak, and tired night shift workers get spooked easily working 12-hour rotations in mostly empty hallways. That was my theory, anyway, and I held onto it fairly confidently for the first several weeks on the job. Then I got assigned to walk that wing myself, alone, at around 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, because the guard who normally covered it had called in sick. The hallway was long, poorly lit because half the overhead lights had been switched off to save electricity in an unused section. Every few feet, a fluorescent tube would be missing or burned out, leaving pockets of near total darkness between the working lights. My footsteps echoed in a way they didn't in the main building, probably because there was no foot traffic to absorb the sound, no carts rolling by, no chatter from nurses' stations. I did my rounds at a steady pace, checking that the doors were locked, that nothing was out of place, planning to be done with the whole wing in under 10 minutes so I could get back to the main building. I was almost at the end of the corridor, maybe 15 feet from the connector doors, when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, matching pace with mine, except when I stopped, they stopped exactly 1 second later like whoever it was hadn't quite reacted in time, like they were mirroring me instead of walking independently. I spun around immediately, my hand instinctively going to my flashlight. Nobody there. Just the empty hallway stretching back the way I'd come, every door still closed, every light exactly as I'd left it, the same pattern of working bulbs and dark gaps I'd walked through minutes earlier. I told myself it was an echo. Hospitals have strange acoustics, especially in empty wings with hard tile floors and nothing to absorb sound. I'd read that old buildings settle at night as the temperature drops, that pipes and structural beams can produce sounds that travel strangely through long corridors. I turned back around and kept walking, faster this time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing or that it really had just been some structural quirk of a building built in an era with completely different construction standards. The footsteps started again. Same pace, same delay. I stopped abruptly this time, testing it, and the footsteps behind me took one extra step before stopping too, as if whatever was making them needed that split second to realize I had stopped. That was the moment I stopped rationalizing it as an echo. I didn't turn around again. I radioed the front desk, told them I was finishing my walkthrough and heading back, trying to keep my voice steady. The dispatcher, an older woman named Carol who'd worked there longer than almost anyone, asked which section I was in. When I told her East Wing, she just said, "Okay. Keep walking, don't stop, don't look back. I'll meet you at the connector doors." I asked her why over the radio, and she didn't answer the question directly. She just repeated, "Don't stop, don't look back." I did exactly what she said. The footsteps followed me the entire length of that hallway, always one step behind, always slightly delayed, right up until I reached the connector doors leading back to the main building. The second I pushed through those doors, the footsteps stopped completely. Carol was waiting on the other side of the connector doors, arms crossed, looking like she'd seen this exact scenario play out before more times than she cared to count. She didn't ask if I'd heard anything. She just looked at my face and said, "First time." I nodded, still catching my breath, my heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with how fast I'd been walking. She sat me down in the break room and got me a cup of water before she said anything else. Then she told me that section of the hospital used to be the original building before it was expanded in the 1960s, back when the whole facility was smaller and staffing was thinner. Room 214, specifically the one guards always mentioned when they talked about that wing, had been a long-term care room decades ago, and according to Carol, a patient had died alone in there during a night shift when staffing was so low that nobody checked on her for several hours. By the time someone finally did their rounds, it was already too late. Carol said the footsteps had been reported by security staff for as long as she'd worked there, which was going on 18 years at that point. Always in that same corridor. Always following someone walking away from that room, never toward it? She said in all her years, she'd never once heard of anyone actually stopping to look, and she didn't want to be the one who found out what happened if someone did. I requested a transfer to a different rotation after that night, and the hospital approved it without asking many questions, which told me I probably wasn't the first guard to make that request. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd stopped walking, or worse, turned around to face whatever was matching my steps 1 second behind. Story 3, The Warehouse. I worked night shift at a distribution warehouse for about a year and a half, mostly doing inventory checks and loading dock supervision. It was a massive building, rows and rows of shelving stretching up 3 stories, with only a skeleton crew overnight, usually just me and one other guy running forklifts, plus whoever was on dispatch back in the office trailer near the front entrance. The place ran 24 hours because of contracts with a couple of major retailers, and the overnight crew existed basically to keep product moving so the morning shift could hit their numbers. It was isolating work in a way I hadn't expected. During the day, from what I heard, the place was loud, full of forklifts beeping and people shouting across the aisles. At night, it was just the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional distant clank of someone else's equipment 3 or 4 rows over. The warehouse had a reputation among the overnight staff, though nobody ever explained exactly why in any real detail. New hires were told one simple rule during orientation, delivered almost as an afterthought at the end of a long list of safety procedures: if you're doing a solo walkthrough and you hear your name called from somewhere in the shelving, do not respond, and do not go looking for who said it. Just finish your walkthrough and head back to the break room. I thought it was some kind of hazing thing for new employees, honestly. The kind of rule senior staff make up to mess with the new guy, passed down as a joke that eventually gets written into official orientation material because nobody bothers to take it back out. I nodded along during orientation, filed it away as warehouse folklore, and didn't think about it again for almost 4 months. In that time, I settled into the job fine. The overnight crew was small enough that Miguel and I developed a pretty easy rhythm. He handled most of the forklift work moving pallets, and I did inventory counts and walked the aisles checking for anything misshelved or damaged. Rows 1 through 30 or so were well lit and close to the main office, always felt normal. But the back sections, rows 35 and up, had fewer working lights, and the shelving there stretched high enough that the tops disappeared into shadow even during the day shift, from what the day crew told us. Then one night, doing a solo inventory check around row 40, deep in the back corner of the warehouse where the lighting was weakest, I heard someone call my name. Clear as day. Not distant, not muffled like someone standing maybe 20 feet away, calling out casually the way a co-worker would if they needed help lifting something. My first instinct was to answer. I actually opened my mouth to respond before I remembered the orientation rule, and something about the way my name had been said, the tone, the timing made the hair on my arms stand up before I even fully processed what was happening. I didn't answer. I stood completely still for a moment, scanner still in my hand, straining to hear if it would happen again, half convinced I'd misheard something entirely mundane, a radio from another part of the building, maybe, or Miguel calling out from somewhere I couldn't see. But the warehouse was arranged in a way where sound from the loading dock or the office rarely carried this far back, and Miguel's voice, when he did call out for something, had a completely different tone and pitch than what I'd just heard. I finished counting the shelf I was on as quickly as I could without visibly rushing, moving with a kind of forced calm, and started walking back toward the break room where Miguel was doing his paperwork. My footsteps felt too loud against the concrete, and I found myself listening past my own noise for anything else moving between the rows. My name was called again. Closer this time. Whoever or whatever it was had moved between the shelves, tracking my direction, and this time the voice sounded slightly wrong, like someone imitating a voice they'd only heard once or twice, not quite getting the inflection right. I walked faster. I didn't run, because some part of me felt like running would change something, like it would confirm I knew exactly what was happening and provoke a different reaction. My name was called a third time, right as I reached the end of the row, and this time it came from directly behind me, close enough that I felt like I could have reached back and touched whoever said it. I made it to the break room and found Miguel finishing his paperwork like nothing in the world was wrong. I must have looked terrible because he immediately set his pen down and asked what happened, his expression shifting the moment he actually looked at my face. I told him everything: the first call, the second one closer, the third one right behind me, and he didn't seem surprised at all. He just nodded slowly, like I was confirming something he already expected, and said, "Yeah. It does that sometimes. You never answer, right?" I asked him what it was, my hands still not quite steady. He leaned back in his chair and told me nobody really knew for sure, but that the rule had existed since before either of us worked there, passed down from whoever trained the trainers, who'd been trained by someone before them. Some of the older employees believed a worker had died in that section of the warehouse years before the company changed ownership, an accident involving the shelving racks collapsing, something that happened fast and wasn't caught until the next shift came in. Miguel said whatever remained in that corner of the building seemed to try getting people to respond, to acknowledge it out loud, though as far as anyone knew, nobody currently working there had ever actually answered back to find out what happened next. I finished my shift that night and never did a solo walkthrough in that section again without someone else nearby. I quit about 6 months later for an unrelated reason, but I still think about that voice sometimes, how close it sounded that third time, right behind me, saying my name like it had finally gotten the pronunciation exactly right.